And here's the thing, and I found myself, is there a compromise between lockdown and normality? Um, I found myself this weekend having a couple of very rare social media, not really arguments. I mean, two responses, and that's all you get from me, okay? I'm not going to spend, I don't engage when it kicks off with an argument. And you know when somebody is starting kind of an argument with you. Frankly, I've got better things to do than argue with half-wits on Twitter. But once in a while, I will, try and placate a situation by, giving it's Twitter, right? It's what you're meant to do, engage, etc. And I'll throw a little reply in there to somebody just to correct some bit of misinformation. So the first part of Saturday, I found myself arguing with people who were suggesting, Collins, you are very, very pro-lockdown. Very, very pro-lockdown. Wow. Where did that come from? I don't know anybody who's very, very pro-lockdown. People are reluctantly supportive of a lockdown, but I don't think people enthuse about a lockdown, do they? By the afternoon, however, I found myself arguing with a different group of people who said I was very, very anti-lockdown. What do you make of that? Do these people not ever check? If you were going to start arguing with a fella on the radio, wouldn't you have a little look at the timeline and go, well, let's see what other people have been saying. Just have a little scroll through and establish, oh, right, he's been having the very opposite accusation just 1 hour ago, and here I am accusing him of something. So there was all this sort of kicking off and lots of people with all manner of mad theories. And as ever, it's so often based on what you didn't say rather than it's the absence of something. So somebody, I can't remember what her name was, but she said, well, I listened to you the other day, you were talking about Trump and you didn't, you were talking about COVID and you didn't mention this and you didn't mention this and you didn't mention this and you didn't mention that. Well, hang on, so I'm now guilty because of what I didn't say. All those other things have been mentioned many, many times in different shows. Not everything comes up simultaneously. So I suppose people get a little itchy because of what they didn't hear you say, and in the absence of you confirming what they want to hear, they will make the assumption that you must therefore have this opinion or that opinion on a certain issue. And it's, I said, a completely balmy anti-intellectual position to have. It's a little like, as I was discussing with Mike, another thing that cropped up, in addition to this sort of curious COVID discussion I found myself in, the Trump thing came back up again. How can you support Biden, his child sex offending family and all manner of other... I said to this guy, where did I support Joe Biden? Well, look at what you said about Trump. Yeah, so because I said that about Trump makes me pro-Biden. You can have a dislike of both characters in all of this. But again, it was the sort of the absence of what wasn't there that had upset this fellow, because he hadn't heard what he wanted to hear. Therefore, he'd extrapolated one must be pro the other. You could be anti both of them and pro somebody completely different. You say to somebody, are you a Chelsea fan? No, I'm not a Chelsea fan. Arsenal, right? Yeah. No. We said you're not a Chelsea fan. You must be you're a dirty gooner, aren't you? No. I'm just... You said you're not a Chelsea. You must be an... It's that stupid, that logic. You could actually support somebody else or something completely different or a different position. But I mention all of this because it's just another kind of stark reminder of the binary world we found ourselves in, the aggressive tribal world we found ourselves in. I was watching some people being interviewed on Capitol Hill outside the White House at the weekend. If you saw that clip, Ricky, of the woman saying, Joe Biden will not be inaugurated on January the 20th. It's not going to happen. Donald Trump will be. On what planet are some people? I get the fact, by the way, you're allowed to like Donald Trump. I mean, the evidence to support reasons to like Donald Trump is kind of dwindling by the second, I sense here. It's obliterated, right? We can probably all agree on that. However, you're allowed to have a different position, and if you don't have the same position as everybody else, it doesn't mean to say there's something wrong with you. You're allowed to have that. As I keep saying, you can't, however, have your own facts, only your own opinions. The facts are kind of immovable objects in all of this. And when it comes to lockdown, this appears to clearly be where we're at the moment. It seems there are three schools of thought. There are people who are pro-lockdown, And they absolutely believe, and I see this across social media, Boris Johnson really getting hit on this one, shouldering or getting a lot of the blame on this. And just a side point on that, if you'll allow me for a second. I'm slightly confused by that. And again, it's another thing I posted at the weekend. You know, when we talk about the death figures, which are terrible, I think it was at the weekend when there was sort of 1,100 people were reported to have died with tested positive for COVID in the last 28 days. I think Germany had the same figures that day, which was interesting, and have for the last week or two. There's been a kind of mirroring in Germany. I know their overall figures aren't as bad, but I don't hear the same arguments. Germans tend not to personalise it in quite the same way. And if you're going to blame Boris Johnson, you'd have to surely blame Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford and others who are on the same level of authority in terms of what they do and don't do in their own regions. 0344 499 1000. So the position on lockdown is interesting. Lots of people now, I notice, particularly of the left, have become, because they sense that this is, they say they don't want to use it as a political tool, but they absolutely are using it as a political tool. This is Boris Johnson has blood on his hands. Oh my goodness, another 1,000 people, another 1,000. It's all Boris Johnson's fault. And if you had a full-on lockdown, people would still die, but people would say it's still Boris Johnson's fault, etc. Those arguments will go on forever. But then there's the curious position of no lockdown at all. Having nothing, everybody just gets back to normal. And I think, again, hasn't that ship sailed now, the arguments for that? For having no this came around with sort of Barrington and various other arguments about herd immunity, and the sense of it was that it's a theoretically herd immunity would work, but actually in practice it never does, because you say, well, all we do, we just look after and isolate the most vulnerable. Firstly, you can't always identify who are the vulnerable, so there's that. And secondly, everyone's wise words of, yeah, don't worry, we'll isolate Gran. We won't go anywhere near Auntie Gladys. It'll be fine. And it doesn't kind of work out. It doesn't work out that way. And eventually it penetrates, and before you realise it, you've got another problem. So and then there's the other group, which I think is most of us, isn't it? Most of us somewhere in the middle. Who think, surely the answer to this cannot be locking down an entire economy to the point that you decimate so many lives, so many jobs, you increase and accelerate mental health problems. There will be people who simply can't cope any longer, so they take it to the ultimate personal sacrifice, which is as grim as it gets. There is the trying to claw back what's left of the economy. There's the vast amounts of redundancies, the lack of money, the lack of education, the schools, the issues with the pressure on hospital. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And we've yet to see any full definitive list or impact assessment of what all of that means. We've not got that yet. So we don't know what it's costing on the other side of this. But what we also know is that if you opened everything back up, then those figures we are seeing, and as Chris Whitty said today, my goodness, doesn't that man look terrifying when you put him in front of a camera, by the way? Man alive. If you want somebody to deliver bad news, stick Whitty on the podium. That's grim. And he told us the next 2 weeks are going to get worse. It's going to be worse. You have to deduce from that that if we eased all the lockdowns, then those figures would rise, and we would be in this, we'd be looking at hundreds of thousands of people who have died with COVID. Whatever the implications of existing health conditions, whatever the implications of age, whatever the implications of obesity and all that goes with it, I mean, these would be game-changing figures that nobody could deny. So somewhere in the middle of all of this, and I don't know the answer. I was talking to somebody at the weekend, and they said, well, why don't they, for example, at the moment, florists can't open. They're not an essential business. But a garden centre can open, and the garden centre can have, they can sell flowers, obviously, in the garden centre, among other things, and ornamental Alsatians and things like that. They can do that, but they can't, the little independent florist can't. So what if you said, okay, right, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you allow this business and that business to open up? Is that a compromise? And I thought, oh, that might be a compromise. That sounds like a good idea. So at the moment, florists are closed, but let florists just open on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Let some other business open on a Monday and Tuesday. And then somebody else countered it and said, well, that wouldn't work, because all that would happen is everybody would just go out. And then if they were stopped, they'd claim they were going to the florist. And you just have lots of people travelling out and about, and before you know it, you're back to square one. And I didn't have an answer to that. But I have something better, and that's a national radio programme. So I thought, in the absence of me having an answer, let me throw this out to you. The compromise between lockdown and normality. How would you do that? Is there a way to sort of have your cake and eat it, I suppose, in that respect? What is it that Chris Whitty, Vallance, Johnson, Hancock, Gove, the entire gamut of those in charge of this, what is it that they don't know that they should know? What is that answer that's staring them in the face? I'd like to think our political masters have had all this info thrown onto their desk and looked at it and said, do you know what, we'll discuss it. It doesn't. I think Johnson wanted to go down that path. I think that's probably where his instincts were to start with, and perhaps to an extent still are. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you sit in the Venn diagram again, he's moved in a different direction. The schools was the latest example of how, you just kind of knew that Boris wanted to keep them open. 0344 499 1000. So a full lockdown seems to be too much. No lockdown would be ridiculous. What's the bit in the middle? What's the compromise in that? What's the suggestion? What are the government not doing that they clearly and demonstrably should be doing?